we aspire to love our neighbor as we love ourselves in obedience to Christ's command in the gospel. But are we also called to love ourselves the way we aspire to love our neighbor? That's what we're talking about today on Elevate Ordinary. Well, hello and welcome back to Elevate Ordinary. I'm your host, JonMarc Grodi.
And I'm Teresa Grodi.
And we're back with another extraordinary conversation about the ordinary pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty. We very appreciate, I have no words, I don't have the best words. We very much appreciate that you're here with this for this discussion. I want to remind you, as always, that if you like what we're doing here on this show, you can check us out at elevateordinary.com. That's where our Patreon community is located, and you can find a lot of information about that there. And the best way to access this show and follow along with this and other shows on Awaken Catholic is via the Awaken app at theawakenapp.io. So check that out as well. Teresa, today we're talking about temperance. We're overdue for this episode. We started working on the cardinal virtues, our little run through a
long time ago,
like a half a year ago or more, or something like that.
We're always working on it. This is just like the least sexy one for me. I don't understand it.
Well, it's the one that involves sex, so it can for many people. This
will be an interesting episode because you're gonna have a lot of dumb questions because I have a really hard time understanding and distinguishing this particular virtue from something like patience or courage. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I'll give a quick recap of the virtues we've talked about so far, and we've talked about all the virtues in many different ways over the last couple of years here on this show. But the reason we were doing kind of another run through them this year is because we hadn't really sat down and worked on the definitions and gone through them.
Each one.
And we've done them in passing, sort of. Yeah.
Gosh, as a non-theologian and a non-philosopher. As somebody who's just kind of like muddling through my days, everyday life. I was just thinking about this the other day, learning the definitions of the virtues and the vices that oppose them, that oppose the virtues in particular. Like it really impacts my daily life and my daily decision making. I mean, almost more than anything, yeah. There are a few things like the discernment of spirits, learning St. Ignatius of Loyola's discernment of spirits that have actually impacted my day-to-day thought process. Mm-hmm. And learning about like the definitions of the virtues, who would have ever thought that?
Well, that's why I'm so passionate about them, because they are really, really profound and powerful lenses with which we are able to look at all the ordinary elements of our life, every moment, every action, all of our thoughts, all of our feelings. Is a framework for understanding how all those work together and what we're going to do if we need to make changes, which we always do. We always need to be making changes, taking steps forward. But oftentimes life is a blur, and the virtues are this great lens for that. But their profundity and power have been often rendered inane and impotent by imprecise definitions or sort of just kind of casual use of the terms that are in imprecise ways.
And I think that the definitions of the virtues and opposing vices, actually help me formulate questions for myself in the moment. Mm-hmm. Like today when we're going to talk about temperance, we're going to talk about the difference between fear and desire. Mm-hmm. And even just like assessing a situation, thinking to yourself, like, what am I afraid of? Right. And sometimes the what am I afraid of is I'm afraid of losing this thing that I want, or this feeling that I want, or, this experience that I want, which would be a desire. But even just being able to articulate that in a moment helps you make a decision in your everyday life.
Right. Or to look back and say, okay, a bad thing happened, I got angry or I did something, but to look behind that or before that action and say, okay, what was going on in my heart? Mm-hmm. I was upset. I'd been upset for a long time before that, but what triggered that? What was going on? And you can begin to put names and labels, helpful names and labels on things, that helps you recognize the next time that comes up and make a little bit different decision for it. It's all about we've already talked about prudence. It's all about keeping prudence at the helm, that we have to be the charioteers. We have to be piloting this chariot, not our feelings, not either our fears on the one hand, nor our desires. They're there for a reason. They have a purpose, that they're part of us. And especially for temperance, that's even more true. But they can't be piloting the ship. They can't be steering the chariot.
Unless you're pregnant. Just gonna throw that
In which
out
case, your husband has to pilot the ship sometimes.
In which case, if your body tells you to eat something. No, I'm kidding. Actually, I was thinking about that on the way up as we were driving, down, as we were driving down, about how, the quintessential example of desire is like the pregnant woman who, if you mention onion rings, it's no longer like, ooh, onion rings sound good. It's like how am I going to get onion rings at 9:30 in the morning, beer battered and deep fried, But I've actually been noticing these last few pregnancies or these last 2 pregnancies, not having as many insane cravings.
Yeah.
Because usually I'm like, okay, like listen to my body. If my body's telling me that I want to eat like, I don't know, something like smothered with mayonnaise, like a Big Mac or not a Big Mac. That's gross. Like, what's that thing from Burger King? I would always eat a Whopper. less on the level of grossness. I don't know. But like I used to have to tell myself, well, fat, like my body's telling me to eat fat. When I was pregnant with Dominic and my doctor, our first, and my doctor had me on a low fat diet because I was gaining weight. All I wanted was like eggs and mayonnaise, eggs and mayonnaise. And my body was just telling me like fat. Teresa tangent.
And now you're on a tangent. Ethan, we're gonna need some onion rings before we continue this discussion. Well, let me contextualize.
Yeah, tell us what temperance
is. Let's get our bearings on the map here, and then we'll talk a little bit about the definition of temperance, and then dig into it a bit. Okay, so we've talked about the 4 cardinal virtues. We're on the 4th now. We talked about prudence, which is this turning to reality, this habit of soul by which we are the kind of people who turn to and we live in reality. We want to stay in reality. We don't want to flee into unreality, into lies, into ideologies, into narratives. We want to stay facing reality and making decisions accordingly. And it's not just an intellectual thing. It's a state of being that we're practicing. It's a habit of being.
I find myself often when we're like looking at church teaching, saying like in my heart and in my head, like I love reality.
Yes.
I love how the church in everything that she does, whether it be, sex or nature or whatever, like is always turning towards reality. And it like just fulfills this deep desire to be real and met and not have any punches pulled. Is that the right way to say that?
Yeah,
phrase?
That works. That works for this.
Your dad always like flips it.
Yeah.
Anyway. Right.
So prudence is turning to reality, living in reality, making decisions based on truth rather than something other than truth. Justice is one of the primary realities that prudence turns to, which is the reality, this highest reality that we live in of being persons created by God as persons who are in relationship with other persons. We live in this web of relationships, relationship with God, relationship with our spouse, relationship with our friends, with our children, with employees, everybody else. And justice is the habit by which we attend to those relationships. We observe the nature of those relationships, and we give to those people according to the relationship. And the relationships are not something that we make up. They're something objective and real. Marriage is objective and real. It's not something I make up. It's not based on my feelings. It is real, and it places real duties and responsibilities upon me. And so justice is acting in accord with that relationship, going deeper into that relationship, and making sure that all the relationships in my life are in relative hierarchical order. So that's prudence and justice. And then after prudence and justice, we have these 2 pillar virtues. And it's important, I think, to talk about courage and temperance, these pillar virtues together, because as you mentioned earlier, they have to do with the 2 predominant passions that we experience that are part of our human nature for a purpose, but are often out of order and are often what is behind our failure to do the good, our failure to carry forth with justice. And those two predominant passions are fear and desire. And so on the one hand, we talked about courage. We talked about courage as being the virtue by which we when we encounter fear, a threat to our mortality or a perceived threat to our mortality, because it's interesting. Every fear, even moderate fear, is like, oh, I don't want to get out of bed because it's so cold outside right now. Like even the smallest fears, they in our body, they give us this sense of like, oh, I'm gonna die, and you have to try to challenge that, like, well, no, I'm not going to die. So even though it feels like that, even though like my body's screaming that, no, I'm not going to die, because all of our fears sort of have this a little bit of an implicit lie in them, that they're telling us something true, but they also contain, because of our concupiscence, they contain a hyperbole, like they contain, this exaggeration, and we have to challenge them a little bit, say, no, I know it's true, and I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to do the right thing, even though it's hard, because it's right, and most of the time I'm not going to die. And even if I do die, if it really is a case of danger, I'm going to do the right thing, because there is a worse death than a physical death. Mm-hmm. So that's courage. Now today we're talking about temperance, which again, it moderates the other predominant type of passion we feel, which is desire. And let me quickly read from the Catechism here, just to get some additional words and phrases out here that we can use. This is paragraph 1809. Temperance is the moral virtue that moderates the attraction of pleasures and provides balance in the use of created goods. It ensures the will's mastery over instincts and keeps desires within the limits of what is honorable. The temperate person directs the sensitive appetites towards what is good and maintains a healthy discretion. And there's more in there, and it's all good stuff, but that gives us the basic meat of it, that it's the virtue that deals with moderating and directing and guiding and ordering this life of desires and that we have inside. Response.
I don't have what I'm thinking.
So this is a good definition. There's lots of definitions you could put toward temperance. I like the way that Joseph Pieper puts it in his book on the cardinal virtues. Very, very simply, he puts it, and this is kind of what I alluded to at the beginning of the episode, that temperance could be seen as selfless self-preservation. Selfless self-preservation, as opposed to selfish self-preservation. So we're created by God.
Sitting out of the shot.
We're created by God with desires for food and drink and reproduction and affirmation from the community and all sorts of other things that are for our flourishing as human beings. And so they're good. They're good. I mean, they're created by God. Those things are created by God. Our desires for them are created by God. The issue is that because of our concupiscence, because of our, the effects of original sin, they're often out of order, or they're disproportionate to what's actually good for us. They're not submitted as they ought to be. They're not in line with our intellect and will. So they're not, oftentimes, rather than being the horses that drive the chariot under the guidance of prudence, they're often, pulling the chariot all over the place, to the food, and then to the drink, and then to the sex. And the key is that temperance means we bring the horses into order. We give them a purpose and a mission, but we remain the drivers of the chariot.
Yeah, we were talking about it on the way here, and I'm still trying to puzzle around this. But when I think of a desire that I have for something, I mean, aside from the very, very basic desire, I'm trying to think of something that I binge, and I binge raspberries. Okay, it's just when I buy them at the store, they don't make it home, even if I have 3 or 4 containers. But aside from that, it's hard for me to think of a desire that I indulge in that isn't fear-based, which would push it into the realm of courage, I guess. But I mean, it is really hard for me to think of something that is just truly desire-based.
Well, Explain what you mean by that. So what do you mean fear? We were talking about this in the car, but make sure that we put it out there.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of like if I sit down, if I'm being lazy, okay, so you would think just like, oh, your desire to sit and binge and like get a dopamine response, you know, from being on your computer or whatever. The reason why I sit down in the first place is because I've thought of something that I don't want to do.
Right. You're stressed out.
Or that I'm or when I think of it makes me afraid.
Right.
You know, like I'm always, this is like a perpetual thing that you and I are always going over. Like I'm terrified that we're going to get so many piles of mess in our house that I can never tackle them. And we're just going to live life on top of piles of things.
Right.
Okay. And so sometimes, like, especially when I'm really pregnant or I'm sick or something, and you have to say like, you can't do this thing right now. You can't go outside and lift a whole bunch of things and move things around, you know? Like the response to that fear is then like, well, I might as well just not do it. I better self-care and sit on the couch and just watch TV.
Right.
You know, but it's not necessarily based in desire.
Right. So one thing, and Joseph Pieper talks about this in his book, The Cardinal Virtues. And I don't have the reference with me, so I'm going to paraphrase him. But there, again, as we've said from the beginning, talking about these virtues, that there is a specific, they are in an order for a reason: prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. And I like to think of fortitude and temperance as these two pillar virtues, but there is still a sense in which actually courage is still a higher virtue. And I won't go into the reasons for that, right? All the reasons right now, because I can't think of them, you know, but at least in this respect, that a failure, many of our weaknesses with regards to temperance do have their base in a fundamental lack of courage. In other words, like we go through life, we're anxious, we're fearful, we're stressed out people for various reasons. And that state puts us vulnerable to failures in temperance because, hey, an easy way to deal with the stress is to indulge in something. Am I indulging in this fundamentally because I just absolutely love raspberries so much? Well, no, maybe
Buffalo chicken dip.
It could be. I mean, that could be your thing, I suppose. But that actually would be a more innocent weakness, right?
And that's why it's easy to indulge.
It's just a weakness of desire. But for many of us, like our intemperance is actually based in a failure of courage, and that we're wrestling with fear, we're wrestling with stress, anxiety in our lives, and the easy outlet for that, the easy way to get some temporary relief from that is to indulge in something sensual. And so it's an important distinction because sometimes I think it's important because sometimes you can't attack issues of temperance directly. You have to attack them indirectly. You know, so like the person who has an issue with alcohol, he can't necessarily go right to the source and say, okay, I'm just going to practice drinking less alcohol rather than as much as I have. Well, sometimes he has to take a break from alcohol and work on his life, and he may not be able to go back to it at all. And that's, I think, true for lots of things in temperance. We can't always attack the thing itself. You know, the thing, I keep coming back and overindulging in this. Well, sometimes the attack isn't to just try to indulge less or the right amount. We may be too weak for that. We have to address what's causing this weakness. And oftentimes that's not more on the level of fear.
So that's why you would call courage a higher virtue, because if there's something wrong in your temperance, it's likely a wound in courage,
right?
Like something you're afraid of,
right?
That you're not facing,
right? You know, again, sins of temperance are in some sense more innocent sins, right? You have the person who otherwise they're basically virtuous, they're basically prudent, just, and courageous, but they just they have an overabundance of desire for some good thing. Well, there's still a failure there. There's still a sin, but it's a much more innocent sin versus the person who craves something because they have an unexamined and undealt with fear and wound that they're not facing up to. Well, that ends up being a much more dark, kind of a moral place to be in. And it's not located primarily in temperance.
It was like the gospel reading today.
Was it? Dang.
The young man who his dad told him to go out and work in the field, and he was like, no. And then he's like, yeah, I should do it anyway. Yeah. And then the other young man who was like, yes, father, and then didn't go and do it. I don't know why that connected today. Just don't worry.
Yeah.
Either you get it or you don't, right?
Another person who's, I think, phrased, well, unintentionally, I think, described temperance in a neat way recently. Jordan Peterson, we've referenced him before in here, in his book 12 Rules for Life. One of his rules, I'm not going to get the wording exactly right, but it's something like, treat yourself as if you were someone for whom you were responsible to care for, or something like that. And I referenced it a little bit at the beginning of the episode. It connects with Christ's gospel exhortation to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, to love your neighbor as you love yourself implies there's a healthy self-love, right? Well, what's that? How do you figure out what's the healthy way to love yourself? Well, you turn around and say, well, how would I, if I was to care for my neighbor, how would I care for him?
Well, I don't understand how that connects with temperance.
It connects to temperance because when we have to apply reason to our desires for self-preservation.
Okay.
Like the desires themselves can't be the metric. Like if I try to decide how much I'm to eat today, well, just how much I feel like eating can't necessarily be the guiding principle there.
Maybe it's because I'm like type A choleric and a woman that I hear that a completely different way. I hear that as like you just had a baby and you've got a gaping wound the size of a dinner plate in your uterus. Stop getting up and like walking around and trying to do things around your house. Because if you were taking care of somebody who had like a gaping wound on their leg and it started ripping open every time they moved around, you would tell them, sit still. But that in my mind doesn't line up with temperance.
Why?
Well, because it just seems like.
So in that case, you have a person whose desire is to get up and feel productive as a type A person.
There you go.
Your desire as a type A person is to always be feeling productive, always be closing, ABC. Like you want to get there and sail, you want to get some stuff done. And oftentimes you have to say, no. If I was caring for a mother who just had a baby and she was acting crazy and wanted to get off the couch and go, like put in a new garden or something like that, you would say,
it would be in someone's wedding.
No, you ought to continue to rest, and you need to take care of yourself. You need to, you need to eat some good food and you need to, So
I want to do a postpartum episode. Before this baby comes. So just yay. Look forward to that.
For some reason, it's easier, and this is one of Peterson's points that he was talking about in that chapter. For some reason, it's easier when we think about somebody else. If we think about a child or a parent. If we were imagining if they were in our care, what would we want for them? How would we arrange their schedule? How would we want them to eat? Again, if we were trying to set up a good life for them, well, what would that consist of?
Yeah, because your fears are no longer there.
Right.
Your fears for yourself are no longer there.
Actually, that's a good point. It's probably that's probably one of the things that really complicates it. Yeah. Your fears are what make it difficult to be reasonable about that for yourself. Yeah. So that's a helpful way to think of it too. That it's selfless self-preservation. That was Pieper's point. That it's not an egoistic self-preservation. You're not making it self-referential. What's good for me is what I want, kind of this circular thing. Then you're stepping outside of yourself for a moment and you're saying, no, objectively speaking, what would be good for this person that I am in charge of taking care of, which happens to be myself. And then you try to be reasonable about making rules and making plans, so that you're the things that you desire. So
you are being that charioteer in that moment when you're,
And, and again, we often go through life precisely the opposite, right? And if you think about the term rationalization, when we accuse somebody of rationalizing, you're rationalizing your behavior. Well, what we mean is they're going through life just doing what they feel like, and then they're trying to rationalize reasons why it's the right thing to do. I ate the whole cake. Why'd you eat the whole cake? Oh, well, because it was somebody's birthday and I was really hungry. And no, you're rationalizing.
This is parenting for us right now.
You didn't think ahead of time whether it was a good idea to eat the cake. You just did it, and now you're rationalizing. So if we let our desires drive our action, and then our reason kind of brings up the rear, well, that's rationalization. And we don't want to be people who rationalize. We want to be people who reason. our in prudence, we want to think ahead and say, well, no, what would be the right amount of cake to eat at this birthday party, for instance? What's the right routine and schedule that'll lead to a healthy and peaceful life? What's the amount of sleep that I really ought to be trying to get, and what are the things I need to do, desire aside, to make sure I'm getting that kind of sleep? That's prudence looking ahead and then doing its best to bring those desires for various things into line with the plan.
So I kind of want to pick your brain about how I think a lot of times when you are recognizing something in yourself that you want to smash,
Mm-hmm.
You've recognized your sin,
Mm-hmm.
and you've finally come face to face with it.
Yeah.
And your response oftentimes is maybe rationalization.
Mm-hmm.
But once you've gotten past the point of rationalization, it's like puritanism.
Yeah.
Like
which is interesting, right?
Which is what you associate with temperance. Like when you hear temperance, you think of the temperance movement,
Right.
where you're basically outlawing
Mm-hmm.
or making illegal
Yeah.
this vice so that people can't partake in it. And I don't want to get into like social stuff because I'm not a libertarian. I don't think that all things should be free all the time and be up to people or whatever.
We need rules and we need
like
laws and things.
Yeah. So how do you keep yourself from? Because I'm that way with video games. Like I have
Teresa's got a really bad. In case you didn't know, Teresa's a really bad video game habit. We're working on it, but it's.
No, I have a really big
just
wound
kidding.
from my childhood
Right.
with video games, and I would just like rather not have. And also in a very utilitarian way, like I just don't. Why would I spend my time?
This is a really great example here because so the example you just gave earlier, so you indulge in something, and we all have moments where that happens and we regret it. Well, the question is, do we take that opportunity to reset and go back to prudence, or do we overreact on the level of passion in the other direction? So the desire for the thing you want to indulge in, that's one desire. But then the desire to kind of overreact in the other direction to feel better is just another desire.
Yeah.
So we swing between, the kind of the binge purge cycle,
It's
but they're
so
both
hard.
Yeah.
It's hard though,
Yeah.
because especially now when like information is just so readily available,
Mm-hmm.
and every Catholic website has, their daily thing, their daily clickbait,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not bad. I like Alitalia. Is that how you say it?
Alatea,
Alatea, whatever.
Alethea.
Alethea.
We're both wrong.
You know what I'm talking about. But like they have to produce content every single day, and sometimes the content feels contradictory. I love this. Gosh, I'm saying names and I shouldn't say names.
Yeah.
But it's like, so like let's take magic for example. Okay. I have a background in New Age and dabbling into that kind of stuff, and coming gosh darn close to an exorcism to have to get rid of it. Okay, the attachments of it to me. Scary stuff, it's all real. Don't do it. But then like I couldn't even like think about Sleeping Beauty, the Disney movie,
Mm-hmm.
because there's witches and witchcraft in there, and I bought that and liked it was cool.
Yeah.
I liked that and thought it was cool. Or like, Harry Potter is a great example, or The Lord of the Rings. And actually The Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis's Narnia was something that helped heal that particular wound.
Sure.
But it's like witchcraft is wrong and the devil is real. And anytime you dabble in that stuff, but then it's like, well, when you're in fiction, in the world of fiction,
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that dabbling?
Mm.
Like it's, and everybody, some exorcist says, yes, people who read Harry Potter start to become possessed. And then some exorcist says, no, it's not stuff like that. You know what I mean?
So
It's like, well, I guess, so my point is how do you ever get over that fear of Puritanism and really turn towards the reality of, am I worshiping something? Am I calling on the spirit world to, you know what I mean? Like, maybe you don't know what I mean. I don't know if I'm being clear. But I mean, how do you, when all the information is flying at you from all kinds of different Catholic sources, telling you definitively you shouldn't read Harry Potter or you're going to become possessed? Like, how do you keep this from being scrupulous, the Puritan,
Right.
Like, how do you have so many questions in your head in every moment of every day of,
Well, and again, scrupulosity is a fear, right? It's based in a fear. So it's almost like, again, we have these layers of our being, and when we get down to temperance, we're dealing with the layer that is our passions, our desires, our feelings. And if we remain only at that level, well, then we're just a bundle of desires and passions, and they're going all over the place and they're contradictory.
So would you say that like temperance is the easier thing to rectify? Intemperance, I'm sorry. So like when you're in college and you take the what's my root sin, and everybody gets lust.
Sensuality.
Yeah. Well, like sensuality in all reality is the easiest thing to fix.
Yeah.
Pride and
I'd say that it's so yes and no. I'd say
so temperance, lust would fall under.
So I'd say like if you're working down through the virtues, it's going to be the last thing to go. That you're still going to deal with, desires. Maybe I'm not sure.
Okay, so maybe the easiest thing to fix, but also the last thing to go because they're always present to you.
Right.
Especially if you don't live in a monastery. If you're not living an ascetic life.
You can't get away from the world. You're always going to. Yeah. But
there's always going to be takeout, and there's always going to be,
right.
Like a cozy couch with a television.
Right. And again, those are, if it's more on the level of desire and not coming out of a place of fear, then it's a pretty innocent thing. It's still a sin. It's still a missing of the mark, but it's less of a big deal than if we're out of a place of fear. You try to use worldly things to fill a wound, and so that's why I think temperance issues of temperance are not always things we can address directly. It's more we have to go back to the source, the thing above them that's causing the weakness.
Temperance is still just like this ball of confusion.
Yeah. I'm not sure.
Is there any hope in this
episode worked? I'm not sure if we can land this.
So just forget about temperance.
Just forget it doesn't exist.
The church says it's one of the 4 cardinal virtues, but forget about it.
Church is wrong.
No. See, we should have brought stuff in from the scholastics and the fathers on temperance.
It's all in here. Okay. We'll cut out a bunch of this. I'm not sure.
We don't have to cut out any of this, babe. People have podcasts that are like 3 hours long. Do you ever watch Matt Fradd? He literally just got drunk on his lap.
Well, first of all, you just said that, and second of all, he's also got a really cool accent.
No, he's really cool. No, I always think about how can I make this podcast more like Matt Fradd's.
Yeah.
Because I'm always pregnant. I can't drink on the podcast.
Tell us, what's your secret?
I fail.
Other than the accent.
No, it's the drinking.
Is that what it is?
Yes. Pints with Aquinas, babe.
Regardless of what got cut before this, let's wrap this up by a quote from St. Augustine, which is here in the Catechism. I'm going
to look intently at you
okay.
as if we had just been talking.
Okay. He writes, "To live well is nothing other than to love God with all one's heart, with all one's soul, and with all one's efforts. From this, it comes about that love is kept whole and uncorrupted through temperance." I'm going to read more of the quote in a moment, but an important aspect of temperance he kind of mentions here is sort of purity and integrity of heart. And one of the effects of intemperance, in other words, being people who have a desire, attachment to all kinds of things, is that we don't have an intact and pure heart that we can give wholly to God or to spouse or to neighbor. And so one of the reasons we temper our desires is because we want to have a heart that is single, a mind that is single, so that we're able to love kind of purely. Again, when we say purely, we're not talking about sexual purity here. We're talking about whether you're a divided person or you're a singular person. And when you're a person who's pulled all around by all kinds of different desires, you can't be present. You can't give your heart simply to one person or to one activity. And so that's one of the effects of temperance, is that there's a serenity of spirit. Aquinas talks about this, that temperance is the serenity of spirit that comes about as a result of inner order. So you put yourself in order, and you have this serenity of spirit by which you're able to
That really
approach
actually
people.
makes temperance make all the sense.
There you go.
That's
Thanks,
what-
St. Augustine.
Yeah. I thought it was Aquinas.
Well, there was
Who
multiple
you just
quotes in there.
said afterwards.
Oh, the Serenity of Spirit? That's
well,
Aquinas. That's
the
Aquinas.
like dividedness.
Yeah, well, so it's a bit of both, yeah.
Because I mean, that's me. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you live with me. You see it. There's a million different things that I can do, and I've got the whole world is my oyster, as oyster farmers say.
Larry the oyster farmer always says.
But like, no, I mean, one of the hardest parts of homeschooling
Yeah.
was not doing all the things.
Right.
I mean, that took me several years to be like, I don't have to have a million busy bags. We don't have to do all the unit studies. And we don't have to, like every curriculum looks amazing and every curriculum is the one I'm going to choose. It took a really long time to make myself a less divided person by focusing my heart on the one thing. And we need to do an episode or so on homeschooling, where like we really focus on what we actually want for our children and not all the different amazing opportunities that now we have because we don't have
this is
a brick and mortar
again, this is
school
another
system.
effect of prudence being at the helm, in that we may have a desire, even again, all these desires are good in a sense, right? Even if they have a misdirection or a twistedness to them. But our desire to do all the things, to do all the activities, to take all the opportunities, to do all the social events. There's a good desire there, but prudence has to step in and say, well, we can't do them all. We have to pick the ones that fit in our schedule. We have to not let those crowd out more important things like prayer or like family time. And so again, our desires, orient us towards good things, but they have to be submitted to prudence, making a plan, being reasonable about organizing our life.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about this because this
Okay.
is a difficult, there's not a mom's meeting or meeting with my friend that goes by where we're not talking about the pressure of all the things that we're missing out on. And not necessarily like career things or whatnot, but just like, I couldn't do this Bible study at church, or I couldn't participate in all the activities, or my kids aren't going to go to ballet this semester and I'm ruining them and they can't, you know what I mean? Like,
Is it
they
more
can't go to this person's party. They can't go to this person's
FOMO?
Well, but so where does that, where does that fit in there? Where you have the desire for all the good, all of the opportunities. So I've been looking at temperance as a negative.
Yeah.
Like a thing I need to cut out. But that quote just made me think of it instead as a positive. I mean, you always think that way, like fruit and sex or fruit. I'm being really specific here.
Yeah.
Raspberries are in my mind. You think of something good, but I had never thought of it in terms of like actually needing to rectify my need to eat raspberries on the way home from the store. I mean, like that never really entered my mind as something that needs to be changed.
Yeah.
But it's a struggle not to put things on the schedule because they're good opportunities.
Right.
I mean, I have tons of good friendship opportunities that I have to miss out on because I have other things in the lines of because you just can't do it all.
Right.
You can't schedule it all and be like a sane person.
Yeah.
You would be like a crazy shifty eye. I get that way sometimes when I do too much. Like I'm shifty eyed. I can't keep my focus on anything. And is it Aquinas or Augustine who was saying that like being a divided, being a whole person, or a person
Augustine
who
was
has
saying
a
from
pure heart.
From this it comes about that love is kept whole and uncorrupted.
Wait, who said that? I wasn't listening to the first
That's
half.
Augustine.
Augustine,
Augustine, sorry.
whatever.
Aquinas, somewhere in Aquinas, it's the Serenity of Spirit. Temperance is this. So the fruit, you talked about the fruit there. So there's the tempering side of temperance, where there's kind of a restraining, a saying no, a holding back. And that's kind of the popular conception of temperance is just the negative. But the fruit of tempering is a serene spirit, an intact heart that can be given wholly to one thing. So when I'm enjoying this activity or this person or God in prayer, my heart is now at peace and whole, so it can be given. Because again, the end result, the goal here is not to be people. We're not to be Stoic Buddhists for whom desire has been killed off. Like we'll solve our problems by killing off desire and just kind of being Stoic robots now.
Yeah.
No, the goal is to be people whose hearts are now ordered and pure, and we can be passionately in love with God.
Yeah.
Or fully enveloped, involved, present to the person that we're with. And that's this fruit of temperance.
Yeah. I think we had talked about it before in a friendship episode where being married to you, being committed and married to you, has made me a better lover of other men, because there isn't this like fear of missing out or like this attention I want to grab from another person like it was when I was single.
Right.
Where it's just like everybody's a possibility.
Yeah.
Where now that my heart is at rest and my heart is undivided, then it means that like it's like all the male and female world, but I'm talking specifically about marriage here. But like the male world is like a beautiful unfolding of like a person, that I can enjoy and love. And truly love, thinking of men in my life who are just so, I just love them and I love them more and I love them with a more, not pure because that makes you think sexual, but like a pure, just love for the person.
Yeah. Well, then this is really good. You're uncovering layers of temperance that I hadn't thought to talk about. And this one is precisely that. So when I talk to the kids about temperance, the way I described it is, well, it's enjoying a good thing in such a way that it remains a good thing for you. In other words, you use the example of men. We can pick anything. Like if we have no temperance with regards to ice cream, well, we ruin ice cream. Like you eat ice cream and you get sick and you're like, oh, it's terrible. Like, but also not just that you overindulge and you suffer the consequences of it, but it's that in your craving for it. I mean, in an intemperate craving is a desire to be fulfilled in a way that thing can't actually fulfill you. So the indulgence is to try to make that thing something it's not. Just like lust, you're using that person as an object when they're not an object. And so there's the bad effects of doing that, but there's also the fact that you've also destroyed your ability to enjoy that person or that thing in what it actually is. You can't enjoy the person, you can't enjoy the ice cream, you can't enjoy the alcohol, you can't enjoy the thing because your intemperance kind of malforms your ability to experience it. It's only the temperate man that can enjoy the things of this world, who can enjoy food and drink, the beauty of a painting, the beauty of another person. Only the person who doesn't have desires that have run rampant can enjoy those things for what they are and not for what their imagination wants to make out of them.
Yeah, I'm going to find a way.
Yes.
This was jogged.
Okay.
And I'm going to try to remember how this was jogged.
Okay.
Okay. So, over the last few years, moving our schooling to home, staying, moving your job closer to home, having things, inviting people to our home instead of like always going to social events in different places and getting a babysitter and going away from home. Like we have endless social opportunities because we just invite people over to our home all the time. I have found it like I'm a better wife. I'm a better homemaker. You live with me, so I know you're thinking like, are you? No, but like on internally, your mind is blank. There's a cat in the room.
The nothing box.
So for the people who are just listening to this, there is a cat in the room.
Actually, yeah. That wasn't a euphemism.
Like my life is stable and centered in a way that. I heard that cat.
The cat is gone now.
The cat's gone.
Cat status update. Cat is gone. Continue.
And I see the ways in which I could be frantic if my career was elsewhere, if our schooling was elsewhere, if we were far from family, if we hadn't intentionally made decisions to kind of like rein things in and bring them closer to home. I mean, we even noticed this when we were helping take care of my dad after his spinal surgery, that the closer he was to our home, the better I could help. Otherwise it was kind of like, oh crap, we get to spend a half an hour with my dad over lunchtime because I can only take one kid into the nursing home, Yeah. But the closer things were to the less divided I was. And that actually makes me like a better servant to the church. It makes me a better servant to society. Actually, I think about this all the time. Since we've decided for me to stay home and for us to homeschool, I've been offered a job at least once a year. And like a job I would totally take, jobs I would totally jump on, or like big positions somewhere. And every time I kind of look at those positions and I'm like, they would make me impotent, with the exception of one. Like I work for a pilgrimage company, which is my dream job. But like my dividedness, I see now would make me make me a less better servant, a less of an asset to the people who are thinking they're going to hire me to be this asset.
This is good. I mean, so one way we might put this, again, you mentioned earlier, kind of being a type A personality. I think people who have more that personality type, the temperament, probably are the kind of people who do deal more with temperance in a more pure sense, in the sense they want to do it all. It doesn't necessarily always based out of a fear. It's, I just want to do all the things, whatever. And the reality is, though, you can't really multitask. You can't really do all the things. You oughtn't half-ass many things. You should whole-ass a smaller number of things.
Whole-ass the really important things.
Right?
And then the rest of the asses will kind of just fall in line.
That's right. So there is this need to not let our desire to produce, to be fruitful, to do all the things, make us impotent by dividing us too far. That's, again, where prudence has to be the guide here. We have to submit this all to reason and to prayer, saying, Lord, but what are you calling me to do? Not just what do I want to do, because if it was just about what I wanted to do, I would do all the freaking things.
I'm
and
totally
so, Lord,
capable.
what's the thing I'm called to do? Because in that thing, even if it's less things than I would by my own desire want to be involved in, I'm going to be more fruitful because I'm going to be more focused on one thing. I'm going to be more present. I'm going to have a more integrated and unified heart, but also because by stepping into God's will, I'm connecting to grace. You know?
And it's not just like, I want to clarify this because I think a lot of times people think they're called to things and they're not actually called to things. Okay. So, I could have rationalized a lot of reasons why I would have been called to take any one of those jobs. Sorry, we're both yawning like ridiculously through this entire episode. We're boring ourselves. What was I saying?
Clarify God's will. God's will.
Yeah, like, so all of the positions that I had been offered were all Catholic in
good
relation,
things,
you know, and I could have been like, God is calling me to do this thing. But then when I am where I am now, with the power, quote unquote, that I've earned now over time, I can actually look at all these oysters. All these things, all these opportunities, and say, like, this one, it serves the most in my own sphere of justice, and I am capable of doing this in my particular vocation, as opposed to being like, this is a made up thing. This is not something I was offered. I want to be director of pro-life ministries in the Diocese of Toledo. I can serve so many people and help so many things. But, but you could, but then you'd have to reorder all the things that you've spent the time ordering in terms of your vocation and justice and whatnot.
And you often, I think we'll all recognize us having been at this place at times in our life where when we're operating on the level of just trying to negotiate many different desires, we're like, I feel like I'm stuck. Like, I want to do that, but also I want to do this, and I want to keep taking good care of my family, and it's all these wants, and we're trying to find a plan where we can make them all work together. And while we remain on the level of just our desires, like we feel stuck. We feel like, oh, how could I possibly negotiate this? How can I figure out what the best plan is? Well, and again, this is something you get to know over time as you practice the virtues, is that you're able to set that aside a little bit and really ask with a pure heart, like, Lord, but what am I actually called to do? What is not just what I want, but what really actually makes sense? And those decisions become clearer, where I'm not basing this on my wants. I'm basing this on a reasoned, organization of my life.
And the reality
this thing
is,
that I desire, it doesn't fit right now.
Yeah, is that you can't do all the things. Because we often see people where we're like, they do all the things. And I think people say that. I mean, no, not I think. I think people think that of me, and I hear people say that to me often. But you do all the things. And I could see how somebody looking at me from the outside would think that. But the reality is that I can't do all the things. And I know that really well. I started with being faithful to my spouse. And I'm not a saint, guys, but I'm just speaking from experience. Faithful to my spouse and faithful to my children, and then truly faithful to the care of the body that produces all the children and takes care of the spouse, and that God is capable of doing all the things. A great book that we always recommend on this is Jennifer Fulwiler's One Beautiful Dream. Where you're always trying to, you have this person in mind who does all the things, and you're trying to be that person. But the reality is that you're not seeing how they've ordered their lives, so that when God opens the opportunities, they seamlessly fit into their life. And the calling is there, and it just is open, and it works because the desires have been ordered according to prudence and justice, right?
That's a great book. Yeah, there's great examples in that book. She's kind of talking autobiographically of situations. I mean, she's wrestling with discerning what's God's will. I want to take on this project, but does it fit my life or does it not? She's discerning that, figuring that out. And at some parts of the story, she begins to grasp too much at this thing and tries to fit it in her life in a way that's not going to fit, and it's going to actually mess things up. Whereas in other times, when it's the right moment, she's able to bring in this project, and it's able to fit beautifully into the whole of their family life. And so again, God wants great things for us. But when operating merely out of desire, we try to just jam it all together. I just want all the things. Well, we end up making a mess. Whereas when we step back and we're prudent, we organize our life, we're operating from a place of peace because we've tempered these desires. Then we're able to receive these gifts from God at the right time and in the right way and the right.
I think this is foreshadowing our next episode.
What is it going to be about?
What you just said. I don't know
the
name of it. We haven't done it yet. Yeah.
We probably ought to leave that there. That's a lot of rambling about temperance. We're going to have to cut a lot of that out.
Shh, don't say that.
I mean, this is perfectly intact. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Elevate Ordinary. I hope that some of the rambling was coherent and interesting and edifying. We'd love to know what you think about this or any of the other virtues or the topics or potential topics we could consider. Again, our basic structure, our basic strategy of this show is beginning with the daily parts of all of our lives, our vocations, our jobs, our marriages, our families. Pick a piece of that out, uncover it, study it, apply the virtues to it. Try to get some insight into the opportunity that maybe we're missing there, and then to go back out into life with a renewed vision.
Yeah, and contact us if you want us to come speak at your event. And if you want a non-rambling speaker, just ask for him. But if you're open to the rambling, we'll both come. Bring all of our kids. It'll be great. And you can check out more about our show at elevateordinary.com. You can join our Patreon community to help support the show. We'd appreciate that. And download the Awaken app to get it's a great way to follow the show and other shows here on Awaken Catholic. And with that, I think that's our episode. Thanks again for joining us for this discussion. We'll talk to you again next week. God bless.